Hello. One of the questions that I've been asked in the past, especially by young people, and young people are inclined to be a bit romantic, which is only natural. And I believe there is something beautiful about being romantic. So I'm not saying this in a pejorative sense. So one of the questions that young people have asked me in the past is, let me try and recollect it exactly in the format in which it is asked. Is it right to turn love into a commandment? Or, now let me try to put it a little more elaborately to make it more intelligible or easier to understand. Can love be the subject of a commandment? Because commandment means an order. Can we order anyone to love? Is it right or proper? Is it even practical to compel somebody to love? So that's more or less the question. So I hope the substance of the question is clear. Now, this question clearly presupposes a romantic idea of love. I remember reading a book a long time ago, the book by Soren Kierkegaard. The title of that book is The Works of Love. Works of Love. And it's by and large an interpretation of the 13th chapter of the first letter of Paul to the Corinthians, which is considered to be the greatest hymn on love. Even though I speak with the tongues of angels and of men and have no love, I am but a sounding brass and tingling cymbal, so on and so forth. So, in that book, Kierkegaard says that the world understands love only as a sentiment or as a passion of preference. That's the exact expression he uses in that book. He says a preferential passion or a passion of preference. He uses both expressions. Let me explain what that means. When a young man falls in love with a young lady, he is investing his passion in her out of a preference. He prefers her to all else in the world, and likewise as far as the young lady is concerned. So they reciprocate each other's love as a preferential passion or a passion of preference. Now then, Kierkegaard asks a question: what happens when the basis on which this preference is constructed, and often this preference is external beauty? Suppose a young man falls in love with a young girl because she is beautiful, and God forbid she is involved in an accident and her face gets disfigured. What happens to his love? If his love fades away because the physical beauty of the object of love is ruined, then it was not love at all. The young man was under the illusion that he was in love with her. And that's what Kierkegaard says, and I quite agree with him. So Kierkegaard's argument is that the worldly love or romantic love or love as the poets exalted stands on very, very brittle grounds. It stands on conditions that are actually superficial, and superficial conditions can always change. And then he goes on to say that love founded in God can never change because God is eternal. And in saying this, he uses mainly the 8th verse of the 13th chapter of the first letter to Corinthians, where love is described in this manner: love never fails. Kierkegaard asks the question, why is it that love never fails? He says only that love cannot fail which is founded in God. All other forms of love will change, and therefore he says that it is from God and God alone that we can learn to love. There's no other source. It's in vain that we turn to worldly sources to learn the discipline of loving. However, let me not go too much into Kierkegaard's idea of love. If you're interested in pursuing this further, you can read that book, which is very readily available on the net, Works of Love by Soren Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard, therefore, through his analysis, comes to a conclusion that love has to be turned into a duty. Because, and this is exactly what he says, love of this kind, that is, love which is other than a preferential passion, which is natural to human beings, love of the spiritual kind does not come naturally to human beings. It's beyond human nature to love in this manner. For example, Jesus says, love your enemies. Now that means that the duty to love that's placed upon us or transcends the particular attributes or the particular limitations of the object of love. Your enemy is someone who cannot love you, but your love should be such that you can overcome the limitations of the object of love. I hope that's clear. Now, let us consider this question, which bothers young people, thinking young people. Isn't it highly improper to turn love into an obligation? Does not love suffer some kind of unfortunate change when it is turned into a coercive or compelling duty? Now, in order to answer this question, we have to look at something which is related but seems different. Now, one of the most basic issues in human life, and religion is by and large a response to this fundamental problem, is the problem of the divided existence of every human being. One of the most fundamental insights that the spiritual traditions of the world share in common regarding the understanding of human nature and the human predicament upon this earth is that every human being is divided within himself. For example, there is a division between what we really want to do and what we actually end up doing. And literature itself has treated this subject in great detail. Philosophy has addressed this in its own way. Psychology has addressed it in its own way. So it's a subject that is widely recognized, and the most fundamental insights regarding this crucial human issue still belong to the domain of spirituality, and that's the reason why all of us must take the spiritual discipline and the spiritual understanding as seriously as it deserves to be. Now, this issue, namely that there is always a discontinuity within us, that is to say, the good intentions that we harbor are not translated into good actions. As a result, we live a miserable life. Our life is condemned to futility and barrenness because our good inclinations, good insights, good tastes are not translated into corresponding actions. So there is a contradiction between what we actually will and what we do, or what we desire to do and what we actually do. So between the intention and the effect falls a shadow, as T.S. Eliot puts it in one of the poems. Now, the question really is, so this is the state of illness in which human beings are. Everybody in this world is ill in this respect, that human nature is a sphere of self-contradiction or an inner disrelationship. That's exactly the word the Soren Kierkegaard uses. Human beings exist in a state of inner disrelationship. That is, our nature has split into two. The two are not properly harmonized. Rather, one works to the frustration of the other, and that aggravates our sense of futility, disempowerment, and impotence. So this is the substance of the misery of human beings. And the question is, how can human nature be healed of this universal human malady? There is a malady or disease simply on account of being human. Animals do not suffer from this problem. Only human beings have this problem. How can humanity be healed of this most fundamental and universal human disease. That's the issue. So this can be healed only by reharmonizing or reconciling those two parts of our nature which are now split apart or alienated from each other, one working to the frustration of the other. So long as we remain this inner quarrel, this inner disrelationship, this inner contradiction, one aspect frustrating the other, we shall not know peace or harmony or fruitfulness in our life, and our life will be burdened and we live the weariness of it all the days of our life. So what human beings universally need is deliverance from this state of misery. The question is, how can this be done at all? And everybody agrees, and Hegel in particular. In fact, Hegel is the most seminal thinker here. Hegel, Soren Kierkegaard. And there is a Russian philosopher who influenced Dostoevsky. His name is Vladimir Solovyov. He is not known in India. I have not heard a single reference made to Vladimir Solovyov by any philosopher or thinker or writer in India. Therefore, let me not make too much of Solovyov. The title of his book is The Meaning of Love. It makes very interesting reading. Now, so all these writers agree that the only point of integration, the only principle, the only force which can integrate the two parts within us which are split apart are now existing in a state of mutual contradiction or mutual disrelationship is love. Love alone is the integrating force. When love becomes the dominant or shaping power in our life, in our personality, then the two fragments of our own personality which are now existing in a state of mutual alienation, they become one. And once they become one, our personality gets transformed. To use a very trite material analogy, think of a battery. It has got two poles. As long as the two poles remain unconnected, no light comes out of it. The moment they are connected through a wire or they are reconciled, so to speak, it produces light. So that is the state of health that's envisaged in spirituality. It's in that state, as Jesus says, you are the light of the world. We cannot be the light of the world so long as we remain, a kind of living coral walking around on two legs. So long as we are not reconciled within ourselves, how can we be agents of peace or hope? How can we be light to the rest of the world? And this is a fundamental reality that needs to be addressed. And if you look at the various instances of healing that Jesus performs in the gospel accounts, you will find that every one of them includes this process of reconciliation. And this process can be very clearly seen, as I've explained in one of my previous videos, in the story of Jesus healing the paralytic found in the second chapter of the gospel according to Mark. But it's also found in all other instances of healing. In fact, there can be no healing, no restoration of wholeness unless this reconciliation, this inner reconciliation takes place. So it's for the same reason, for example, that in his conversation with the woman of Samaria, Jesus has to enable her or even force her to look into herself and see the contradiction that's embodied in her. And then she comes out of it, she becomes a reintegrated soul and her life is transformed. So now, therefore, if humanity is to be helped at all, it is necessary that the foundation of human life is re-established as love. At the moment, because of our alienation from God, we have lost the foundation of love. God is love. When we are alienated from God, what we lose is the capacity to love. And that vacuum is filled or substituted with power. So if at all we have any love, it's only love for power. And each one of us has a love of power in our own ways, limited, but the love of power remains. The desideratum, the common factor of all human beings. Now, so long as we are addicted to power in whichever form, this relationship, this fragmentation, this inner quarrel within ourselves, this our remaining living alienations will continue, and we lack wholeness. Our life becomes weary, heavy laden, barren, fruitless. We can't do any good. The moment we are delivered from this and we are reintegrated and re-established on the foundation of love, our healing takes place and become a new creation. Therefore, the most fundamental issue in spirituality is how to transplant human nature from its present addiction to power to the new foundation of love. So at that point, a certain coercion is necessary, because this will not happen naturally. Much like in medicine, a surgeon will have to use force to clean a festering wound, or if that cannot be healed at all, if it's beyond repair, maybe even amputate the leg in order to save the rest of the body. So that violence is a necessary initial investment in healing the patient. So also in the domain of spirituality, a certain coercive element has to be brought in order to effect a shift from the foundation of power to the new foundation of love. Jesus is the incarnation of that love, and therefore he who is in Jesus is a new creation, because in this new creation, it's not power that drives our nature, it is divine love that transforms our personality. Therefore, quite logically, we are a new creation, and the fruits that we produce are also accordingly. And that is really the authentic proof that we have become a new creation. And therefore, though from a logical, romantic, poetic point of view, it looks rather odd that love has to be turned into the subject of a commandment, spiritually it makes eminent sense. In fact, it makes sense only if love is turned into a commandment, for the simple reason that love of the spiritual kind does not come naturally to us, and we have to be trained in the art of loving, much like a student admitted to class 1 has to be trained in mathematics, trained in languages, trained in the understanding of various disciplines of knowledge, and at each stage in the progress of a student, a certain degree of intellectual coercion is involved, and it's quite dishonest and impractical to think that it is otherwise. That degree of pressure or compulsion or coercion, whichever word you want to use, is absolutely essential. It is healthy. Without that, there is no healing. And therefore, my friends, and this is the answer that I give to young people, it is right and proper that love is turned into a commandment. If at all the capacity to love is natural to us, then it is superfluous. But unfortunately, that is not the case, as each one of us would know. If we are truthful about ourselves, it's not love, it is the addiction to power and the hatred, the violence, the selfishness, the unilateral way of dealing with people, including the tendency to exploit whoever we can. All these things come naturally to us. Nobody has to train us. But unfortunately, the freedom, the peace, the harmony, the fruitfulness, the health and wholeness of reconfiguring our nature in terms of love does not come naturally. Therefore, it has to be forced, if you like. But then the moment the force, this shift is effected, the force vanishes altogether, then love becomes as natural to us as breathing or whatever. We don't have to strain in order to act out of the higher nature that God has given to us. So I hope this explanation makes some sense. Thank you.